Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Liberal parties, whether that's the capital L Liberal Party in Canada, the Biden administration in the United States, or the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, are almost always the party of immigration. They celebrate it, they value it, and at least here in Canada, they have recently raised immigration targets to record levels. And with that comes an assumption that because the Liberals are the party of immigration, immigrants then vote for the Liberals. Now, this assumption can lead you down some rabbit holes to conspiracy theories, but it doesn't have to. Plenty of people, likely including many Liberals, just accept it as fact. But what if, simply put, that's just not true in Canada today? Like, not true at all. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Rhea Santos is a video journalist and anchor for Omni News Filipino edition. Omni recently conducted a huge poll of Canadian immigrants. Hello, Rhea.
Hi, Jordan. Good morning from Vancouver.
Why don't you start by explaining why? I know this is the second year you've done this, but why you want to do a poll focusing on newcomers to Canada, and what do we learn from this exercise as opposed to a regular representative sample poll?
All right, Jordan. The immigrant population in Canada has been growing as the country has been known to be open to immigrants and temporary residents. Statistics Canada, in its 2021 census, shares that 23% of the Canadian population are immigrants. That's more than 8 million Canadians of different heritage. With the possibility of a federal election being called at any time, Omni News wanted to find where most immigrants are when it comes to which political party they feel will address the challenges they are facing. And just like most Canadians, life has been tough for immigrants, especially those from certain communities. And immigration has been a big topic of discussion recently with drastic changes on Canada's international student and temporary foreign worker programs.
Right.
So the poll wanted to check on how newcomers feel about being scapegoated for the housing and affordability crisis Canada is in. Through this data, Jordan, we are giving a voice to immigrants and newcomers who want to be heard on Canada's pressing issues. And just like last year's poll, we wanted to know if being here for immigrants and newcomers is still the fulfillment of the Canadian dream they have expected.
So you mentioned immigrants and newcomers. What exactly qualifies somebody to answer this poll? Is it first-generation Canadian? Is it recent immigrant? Like, what are we talking about?
All right, from August 28 to September 9, the Leger online poll asked 1,500 immigrants aged 18 and above, a mix of those who have lived in Canada less than 6 years and those who have lived here 6 years and more. The poll got representation from different parts of the country, from different ethnicities, people of different employment status and household incomes.
So I'll ask you the top line question first. What surprised you most about the results?
Let's start with an interesting finding. Who newcomers want to invite to dinner? Remember, when you invite someone to share a meal with you, that says a lot. So Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who got 26%, tops the list of Canadian political leaders who newcomers want to invite to dinner, followed by Liberal leader Justin Trudeau at 20% and NDP's Jagmeet Singh at 19%. We tried to find out by going out there why people wanted to share a meal with a certain political leader. Our Omni teams got diverse voices ranging from they want to hear, let's say, Poilievre's plan on affordability and housing. One wanted to question Trudeau, why getting licenses for internationally trained medical professionals is taking so long, which we all know is dependent on provinces and regulatory bodies, but he believes that the feds might be able to do something about it. But I think, Jordan, what's more significant is the result of the poll suggesting a shift of political allegiances within immigrant communities.
Explain to me how that works and what kind of shift we're seeing here.
All right, a big factor that dictates the change is how long an immigrant have resided in the country. So 45% of new Canadians who have been in the country for at least 6 years say their political leanings changed since moving to Canada. And when we zero in on the BIPOC community, that number increases to 51% of immigrants. So our poll also showed the enthusiasm of immigrants to vote, with 74% saying they are motivated to exercise their right to vote.
When we say they're shifting, what direction are they shifting in?
The Omni poll data witness a progressive increase in conservative support the longer newcomers are in Canada. The Liberals are very popular among newcomers or those who have been here for less than 6 years. 37% say they are supporting Trudeau if the federal election were held today. But for 45% of immigrants who have been in Canada for 6 years or more, their votes go to the Conservative. And that's coming from a 37% support they have for those who have lived here for less than 6 years. Some of the factors Jordan mentioned that contributed to the change in political allegiance are overall dissatisfaction with the current government. They mentioned poor immigration policies and cost of living. The change was also triggered by social and economic issues since arriving, new experiences they had, perspectives gained, interactions with other people, and what they hear from the media. We talked to a community leader, his name is Manan Gupta, and he said newcomers tend to vote whoever is in power during the time they landed. And after doing reality checks and experiencing hardships, they usually want change. And according to him, this is not surprising even for non-immigrant communities, especially that many are experiencing challenges on cost of living, housing, and access to health care.
So where does that leave support from immigrants overall between the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP?
If the federal election were held today, according to the poll, the Conservative Party will hold a substantial lead among newcomers, with 44% saying they would vote for Poilievre and his party. The Liberals will get support from 26%, and the NDP will be supported by 19%.
How does that compare with what I think is the assumption that many people have, including some folks on the far right who see it as a conspiracy, that the Liberals are bringing immigrants into Canada in order for them to vote Liberal?
I think I would have to leave that question for the Liberals to answer. But I think it is also important to establish that before a newcomer or a landed immigrant can vote, they have to secure their Canadian citizenship. And that takes time.
Right.
What I can share, though, is that the data from our poll suggests that newcomers tend to vote for whoever is sitting in power. And there's a progressive change in their political allegiance the longer they reside in the country. Let's recall immigration announcement on November 2023, where IRCC tabled its immigration levels plan. They said 485,000 immigrants will be welcomed this year, 2024, 500,000 for 2025, and another 500,000 in 2026. So the Government of Canada says this is to support the country's economic growth as population is aging, to fill labor shortages, among others. But some experts are forecasting there might be revisions on these targets as a lot of immigration policies are changing. To be fair, let's be fair, what experts recognize is that the country faced a tough time, especially during COVID, and the government had to make policies to keep the economy afloat. Yesterday, Omni got a reaction from Immigration Minister Mark Miller on the results of the poll, and he emphasized that in every citizenship ceremony that he goes to, the judge highlights the freedom for citizens to vote who they want. He adds that immigrants are free to change their minds and should not be constrained to vote for whoever is perceived to have brought them here. It will be interesting to know, though, the level of participation of immigrants when it comes to the electoral process. But of course, I do not have that data.
One of the things I'm curious about, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, is that immigration is so high on the list of issues for all Canadians right now, and there's been such discussion and controversy around it recently. How do immigrants feel about Canada's current immigration targets in general?
69%, or nearly 7 in 10 Canadians, feel that immigration is an issue that politicians use as a red herring or something that is meant to mislead or distract people from the real problem. 54% of new Canadians feel they are being unfairly blamed for issues such as the housing crisis. Our Omni Filipino team had a conversation with an immigration lawyer from Ontario. His name is Lou Jansen Danzalan. And he said that even history dictates that the first scapegoat of the society are immigrants, or those considered as others. But he believes that the situation Canada is in right now could have been prevented by better policies and those sitting in power having a forecast. My Omni colleagues also had an insightful exchange with Dr. Yvonne Su. She is the director of the Center for Refugee Studies at York University. She said temporary residents, in particular international students, are the ones easy to blame. Why? It's because they cannot vote.
Right.
They don't have political power because of their temporary status. And this puts them in a more precarious situation. We also got a striking clip from Sabine Elchidiak, Canadian policy associate at the Consumer Choice Center, who was also a former policy advisor to some federal immigration ministers. She said that instead of blaming immigrants, the government should be fixing their policies, the same politicians who instituted policies that got Canada where it is now. She further talked about the housing plan released by Ottawa recently that says Canada needs more immigrants to build homes, a testament that immigrants are part of the solution and not the problem. So most experts that Omni have talked to agree on recent government policies putting a cap on the number of international students and temporary workers, but they are saying everything was done in haste without proper consultation with groups directly affected. Policies and rhetoric impact lives, and people should be careful putting the blame on a sector that Canada welcomed.
What do the immigrants polled in the survey think, though, about our current immigration targets and where they should be set, leaving aside that this is obviously an issue that can be used to demonize immigrants? But I'm curious as to what they think about the levels that we're at now, considering the resources that are available to newcomers.
The poll reveals 64%, or two-thirds, think less than 300,000 immigrants each year is a reasonable number of immigrant newcomers Canada should welcome.
So just over half of what we're targeting now.
Yes, a little over half. And 35% say it should be less than 100,000 annually.
And what about the international student program? I know there's recently been some caps put on it, and it's pretty clear that there's been criticism of the program from a number of sides. I'm curious as to what immigrants think of it and what could be done with it.
67% of respondents say stricter policies such as caps on number of students and limiting their working hours are needed. Those who support toughening up on policies on international students are most likely who live outside of Quebec, those who have lived in Canada for more than 6 years and who intend to vote Conservative. When it comes to ethnicity, Black newcomers are more likely to oppose the implementation of stricter policies at 38% than both white and BIPOC overall. And South Asian newcomers are more likely to strongly support stricter policies at 47%. I think we also have to emphasize that the Government of Canada welcomed these newcomers with open arms, especially during COVID. There was even a temporary program that allowed visitors to work in the country as long as they have a valid job offer. There's a support group for international students who even rejected Ottawa's claim that the international student program became a backdoor entry into Canada. They said it has always been a front door since Canada openly marketed it as a pathway to permanent residency and citizenship. There was even a statement from then Immigration Minister Marco Mendicino saying, "Our message to international students and graduates is simple. We just don't want you to study here. We want you to stay here." Although we all know that permanent residency will never be a guarantee if you take the student pathway, the government's language has always been, we want you here and we need you, that students are the best candidates for permanent residency. But unfortunately, that need of Canada has been abused by some institutions, certain schools, colleges, consultancies, recruitment agencies who preyed on the dreams of newcomers for profit.
Speaking of the dreams of newcomers, one of the things you and I discussed last year was immigrants' views of the Canadian dream and whether it was achievable. And The numbers last year weren't great. I'm guessing that they're still not great given the dissatisfaction you've already told us about.
Yeah, but we have a new finding. Okay, almost consistent with the OmniLeger poll in 2023, the 2024 data finds that 59% of immigrants say the Canadian dream is out of reach. From 42% last year, 45% say they struggle to make ends meet. But despite this, 8 in 10 new Canadians believe moving to Canada is still the right choice. And this is similar to the results of the 2023 poll. But let's unpack again what the Canadian dream is for these immigrants. Similar to 2023, 1 in 5 or 19% describe the Canadian dream as a stable and good quality of life. Now, the striking finding this year is 85% say owning a home is part of their Canadian dream, but only 40% say it's possible to achieve this, while 31% of the respondents say they will never be able to purchase a home. Now, is it surprising that owning a home in Canada is a testament of the fulfillment of the so-called Canadian dream of most immigrants? This was, Jordan, an interesting discussion among team members of Omni in one of our meetings. For most immigrant communities, aside from security, owning a home is pride. One member even referred to it as a trophy. In the case of some members of the Filipino community who cannot afford a home, let's say in the Philippines, prior to moving to Canada, because their salaries weren't enough to be able to afford one, moving and working in a country where you earn dollars can make owning a home more or less possible. And if you work multiple jobs, you might be able to own a home in Canada and probably in your home country too. So yes, it's a big deal for most immigrants. And I'd like to believe that if one has the financial backing to afford one, who wouldn't want a place you can call your own? Poll says nearly 6 in 10 newcomers own their homes, while 39% are renters. 37% of the renters are hopeful that they can buy a home within the next 5 years.
So what do immigrants then think are the barriers that are keeping them from home ownership and stability?
Barriers include cost of housing, with 47% having considered moving to a different city or province. 39% of those surveyed are struggling every month to pay for their mortgage or rent. When it comes to barriers to stability and home ownership, I think it is important to mention the struggles of immigrants in the workplace, which were reflected on the poll. The Omni poll says 64% of newcomers not only agree that it is hard to find a job in Canada, but 56% also say it's harder to get promoted or grow in a Canadian workplace. Top reasons for this are the existence of bias based on ethnicity, race, or background, lack of network or connections, and lack of recognition of foreign credentials and experience, which is actually big in the Filipino community. Accent was also mentioned and lack in proficiency when it comes to the English language. And these reasons, Jordan, are not something new. In last year's Omni poll, discrimination, systemic racism, pay gaps exist in workplaces, making it hard for immigrants, especially BIPOC communities, to excel, thus struggling to make ends meet while the Canadian dream goes further out of reach.
So what do you want people to take away from these results? What are you hoping that people understand after engaging with this survey?
We want everyone to know a Canadian born and raised here facing affordability challenges is the same as an immigrant trying to find ways to put food on the table. They deal with the same issues, such as the high cost of living, housing struggles, long wait times to get medical attention, and many more. It has been tough for everyone, immigrant or non-immigrant. But we have to acknowledge that it may be tougher for some immigrant communities and some sectors of the society. 80% of new Canadians believe immigration will be an important issue in the next federal election. There's a split, though, as to how crucial it will be when it comes to influencing voters' decisions. In all the statements I heard from experts and experiences shared by newcomers and immigrants with our Omni teams, I think we should be mindful with how people in power and others use immigrants, international students, temporary workers as scapegoats for the pressing issues Canada has been facing. Again, the number of immigrants, newcomers, was brought about by policies that allow them to enter Canada. And personally, it is my hope, Jordan, that leaders do not use immigrants, especially temporary residents such as international students and temporary workers, as political pawns. Because whatever people in power say or decide on, it will impact lives, families, and their dreams.
Rhea, thank you so much for this and for the work you and the team have done.
Thank you, Jordan. Always a pleasure.
Rhea Santos of Omni News Filipino Edition. That was The Big Story. For more, you can head to thebigstorypodcast.ca. If you want to hear last year's edition of the poll, just go there and type in Rhea's name. You can send us feedback by writing to hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or by calling us and leaving a voicemail at 416-935-5935. The Big Story is available in any podcast player you prefer, and it's on your smart speaker. Just ask it to play The Big Story podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.